Hello, sports history fans. I'm Ross from the podcast Pigskin Tales. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first, let's dive into today's sponsor, just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched into words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. My favorite on the site is Bryce Harper 2021 MVP year. Because I'm a big stats guy, I think that's one of the coolest things ever. Check it out. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved one this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those who you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for 15% off at artofwords.com.
Before the days of Amazon and the internet where you could just order anything, you had catalogs. And football teams, well, they had to order their items through catalogs too. Well, Goldsmith was one of the biggest ones out there, and Timothy P. Brown of FootballArchaeology.com joins us today to tell us about the Goldsmith catalog and some of their endorsers. Tim's coming up in just a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal for positive football history, and welcome to another Tuesday as we get to visit with our friend Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Thank you, sir. Look forward to chatting again as always, and hopefully we'll have something interesting for people to listen to.
Yeah, Tim, you have some amazing things happening, each and every day. And every once in a while you get some of these zingers that I can't call it an earworm. I don't know what it is. It just, it stays with me all day when I read it. I read it in the evening and it stays with me through the night. I'm laying in bed thinking about it, wake up next morning. And one of those is, you keep going into the Goldsmith catalog, and you had one that, that you had back in September out as a tidbit, that talks about some staff that Goldsmith catalog got some information from. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that tonight.
Yeah. So, I guess, first off, just, by way of background, I have something on the order, 30 or 40 vintage sporting goods catalogs, so I collect them over time, or I've collected them over time. It's just a way to be able to look up, okay, well, what, some of it's just images, for the tidbits, but it's also just, you can look at them and understand, okay, this is what this equipment was made of at the time and how things changed and things that they created that disappeared because they didn't really work very well or they were uncomfortable, whatever it may have been. Anyways, so I collect these catalogs, and most of them I'm just, I'm buying them online. And so I don't, typically I'm only seeing like cover photographs, a couple of inside pages, but I don't know what, it's not like, it can be a 90-page catalog. but I'm only seeing images of a couple of them. So anyways, this was one of those. I bought this. Goldsmith was a big brand at the time, and I didn't have a lot of Goldsmith catalogs, so I picked this one up. And then once it was delivered, it was like right away, okay, this is really cool, because in addition to just normal pages showing the equipment, the pricing and everything for shoulder pads and helmets and whatever, each of the different major types of equipment, they had a lead-in cartoon page that kind of told the history of that type of equipment, the history of football shoes, the history of helmets. And so it was, number one, it's just kind of fun imagery. They're interesting cartoons. So it was just a way to, kind of go through those. And then, what I've done, it's a series of, there will be an 8th week now that, but, so it's just a way to publish, to do these show these cartoons, and then just go through the equipment of the time. And so this is mid 30s, so what was equipment like, then? And so the first of those cartoons was about what they called their consulting staff. And so that was, essentially a consulting staff was like the coaches and one trainer who were their advisory staff. They were the guys who they would go to talk through, what kinds of changes do we need for the equipment, or if they had a research and development group, they would they'd show these coaches, hey, here's what we've come up with. What do you think about this? Can you have you guys wear this stuff in spring practice or in regular practice and see how it performs? So they were, obviously these coaches were paid. And in many cases, the manufacturers would then, just like your old baseball gloves, where it was like the Mickey Mantle glove or whatever, there were pants and helmets and footballs that had the Newt Rockne name on it, or whomever, Pop Warner and John Heisman, and so.
Well, Tim, was Goldsmith, were they sort of in the Midwest? Is that what I'm getting a sense of, or what part of the country were they centered out of?
A lot of the coaches that are on this advisory staff are Midwest guys, so I kind of get a sense of that. But there was a lot of Midwest, like D&M was out east. They were like a Massachusetts firm, but Spalding was Midwest. Reach, I believe, was Midwest. There were a couple down in St. Louis. So, I don't have that catalog in front of me, but I could, I could look it up, and I can, let you know, kind of where they were based.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Is there a reason you ask her?
Well, I know that Spalding was out of Chicago, and it just seemed, and it seems like you said, a lot of these coaches are Midwestern teams, Western Conference, Big Ten teams, and I'm just wondering, if there was a reason why, maybe, distribution or something, that they were in the center of the country. Because you think about that area, football starting in the East and moving west, you'd almost think the equipment would be more of an Eastern based, industry shipping out. But I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think, well, my understanding is a lot of it was the stockyards in Chicago, so there was access to leather.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
So much of the early equipment was leather that, it made more sense to be where you could pick and choose and get high grade leathers and, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's one of those things you wouldn't even think is, there's no reason anymore,
right,
to be near a source of leather. Obviously, baseball gloves are a different story. But otherwise, most football equipment, there's no leather involved anymore. And then the ball, obviously the balls were leather. So anyways, yeah, that's I think that's why a lot of it, started in the Midwest.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so then, like these coaches were, the folks that they had on at that point. So in 1935, they had Hunk Anderson, who was at North Carolina State, but had just finished a tour at Notre Dame, so Midwest. Then he had played at Notre Dame. Noble Kaiser was at Purdue. Fritz Chrysler was at Princeton, but he had played at U Chicago, and then he had coached Minnesota before going to Princeton. And then obviously he ended up at Michigan. Doc Spears had been all over. Well, he was a journeyman. He was actually a doctor, and a football coach, but he was at Wisconsin at the time. And I can't remember if he had just gone there. I think he got fired after that and then out to Oregon, or it could have been the other way around. And then this guy, Frank Major Wandel from Yale, he was one of those interesting guys at the time. There were a lot of, it's kind of like, there are these strength and conditioning coaches now who are, kind of, they have their own brand. They're nationally known, nationally recognized guys. And, back then there were trainers like that too. And he was one of them. So he'd been longtime trainer at West Point, and he ends up down at, I think it was LSU for a couple of years. And then he ends up at Yale, which is where he was at the time. So actually the mix isn't that much Midwestern. But
it's interesting because the image that you have, and folks, if you got to enjoy these images that Tim's talking about, we have a link in the show notes. You can go to Tim's page and see some of these that he's talking about, these cartoons. But Major Wandel, everybody else is sort of wearing like white knickers, and he's got like, I don't know if they're plaid knickers but that's what jumps out of you on the page to me is these knickers, and he's in the lower right hand corner of the page I'm looking at. But he must have been a character to have some, like, looks like he's golfing maybe.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys who just like came out of some gym in New Jersey and ended up eventually hooking in with. He did training, during World War I, and then ends up at West Point for quite a while. But yeah, I mean, back then trainers they handled both the kind of sports medicine side. They weren't physicians, but when we think about athletic training, we're thinking about hot baths and cold baths, and taping guys, and rigging up some kind of contraption to, so it doesn't hurt, as well as strength and conditioning. So they were both at the time, and mostly conditioning because they didn't do as much strength work. But a lot of these guys were, they're big on the whole getting guys to roll on the ground to toughen them up, things that we now think are pretty absurd, but that was kind of core beliefs at the time.
Yeah, I can remember back when I was playing, when I was like, I think the first year I played, maybe I was in fifth grade or something. I remember our coach, he was old school. He was an older guy. And you'd have to, part of your calisthenics, you'd run in place and then drop and make sure your stomach hits first, because that's going to toughen your gut up, as everybody gets the wind knocked out of when you hit the ground and you're gasping for air trying to get back up. But I picture that kind of training, huh?
Yeah, that was the deal. But one of the other things I thought was kind of cool, I can't remember, which reader left this as a comment or a question, but I'm a Purdue fan, and there were a lot of schools back in the 30s that wore winged helmets, right? I mean, we now associate it with just a select few schools, but back then it was very common. Nevertheless, this guy made the comment that, back in the 30s, mid 30s in particular, Purdue wore winged helmets, so wing in front, straps, go in the back, kind of, the Michigan, Delaware, Princeton style now. But so it's like, so that's where, because Noble Kaiser was one of these advisory coaches. And so I would bet if you look at images of the Purdue team from that era, they're probably wearing some form of Goldsmith helmet, right? So as opposed to some competitive brand. So anyways, but for him, it was kind of a neat insight, because it's like, okay, so that's why they wore those stupid ones.
Now, with these coaches sort of being on the board of directors or the consultants of the, now did they is that, did their teams buy all their equipment from Goldsmith then? Was that part of the deal of they got like
I've never really seen anything that goes into the details of those kinds of contracts. I mean, I've read a few things about Newt Rockne, because he was like, I mean, if you think that there's somebody that is on every commercial nowadays, like, Saban, down at Alabama is on a fair amount of stuff, but Rockne was, I mean, he was pitching obviously all kinds of athletic equipment. I think he pitched Ramblers or Studebakers, one of those brands. He did coffee. He did all, stuff for Kellogg, a lot of stuff for Kellogg's, and they had coffee at the time. And just Barbasol. He was big on Barbasol. So he
Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce eat your hearts out. Newt Rockne was the first.
That's right.
Major sponsor, ambassador.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, you asked the, did the coach or did the teams buy that brand of equipment? And so I've never really, I've never seen anything definitive in that regard. And I have this kind of a storyline I've never checked into. I have read a number of things with, Newt Rockne and his, he promoted a lot of different kinds of consumer goods, but then also a lot of football equipment. So, I mean, I have to believe that they, at minimum, they benefited from the, they got discounts on the equipment and in some cases free stuff in order to test it. It had to be that kind of thing going on. But, the research I've done in the past about, like when logos first came, when logos became prominent in the 60s, really Adidas, among track athletes, where that whole thing got going and they were, giving away equipment and paying athletes to wear their branded goods. So that's really where that started. But there were probably, less, maybe a little bit less formal, kinds of, deals in the past, right?
Yeah, I'm just picturing like a high school coach or athletic director saying, "Hey, Fritz Chrysler's endorsing this product, Goldsmith. We better buy our equipment there because we're Fritz Chrysler fans, or Hunk Anderson fans, whatever. They see their hero endorsing it, and that's probably a lot of the attraction for having them on the covers.
Yeah, and I'm sure they got paid something, just like the baseball gloves, and those athletes got things. Somehow they got money when their gloves sold, right? So,
right.
But the details of it, I don't understand or really know anything about.
I wonder. I picture, because you have some great images of the helmets. I wonder maybe we can look back at some old photographs. Maybe I'll do that in some spare time here and look and see if you can tell a Goldsmith helmet from a Spalding or some of the other manufacturers, and maybe you can tell that way and say, hey, Purdue was wearing a Goldsmith in 37 or 30. Yeah. And probably
well, even in that article I did do there I couldn't find a good sharp image of the Princeton team from that era to see, well, what helmet did they wear? Well, in fact, the only thing I really found was a painting or an illustration from a Princeton yearbook, and the helmets the Princeton players are wearing, not what we think of as a classic winged helmet. There's a style of helmet. It kind of looks like now I'm blanking on the term, but it's kind of like a 3-leaf clover sort of design. It's so anyway, but and Goldsmith offered that helmet or that style of helmet, but I think others did as well. So sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what brand, because people they wore they had similar designs, different brands did.
So Go ahead. Go and continue.
Yeah. Well, I was mostly just going to say I'm not sure. I put together some notes in advance, and so I don't know that I had anything else. I mean, other than just one of the things that's pretty remarkable, as in all these catalogs or in all the different product categories, is it like on helmets you could go from like say a $15 helmet down to like one that costs $2.35. So they end up having these high end helmets, and then there's kind of moderately priced ones, and then there's pretty inexpensive helmets. And so you just gotta, it's like now every helmet has to at least meet a certain base, performance level, based on Noxie. But back then it was like, well, no, this is a great helmet. We think it's good, but there's no measurement standards or anything. It's just like you're taking somebody's word for it.
But
Yeah, it's a good helmet.
Yeah, that leads into one of the questions I was going to ask you, because the ad for the helmets that you have on this tidbit, it has 3 examples of helmets that they were promoting, and all of them say leather lined. Now, what would be the alternative to leather lined in that era? Would it be like cloth or something, or
Yeah, I think for the most part, the internals were either leather or felt, and so you'll also see things, and you pretty much have to go look at the less expensive ones to get a handle on the alternatives. So like the pants, as an example, moleskin was kind of the high end. Not as much in the 30s anymore, but moleskin was the higher end material for pants, and then canvas was the low end material. And then there might be different kinds of twills and navy duck and whatever. I don't even know what some of those things really are. That they're one form of cotton, material or another. But then by the 30s, you were getting into, silk, and a lot of times we say like airplane cloth, which is actually a form of silk. So silk, and then I'm blanking on the kind of the really shiny material that
satin.
You'd see that satin, yeah. You'd see satin on the front of certain teams' pants. So yeah, I mean, some of it was once they got into some of the not so like silk. One of the real values of it was lighter, much more water repellent. So it didn't soak up sweat and water in a rainy situation. So the players, felt lighter, but it also silk is much more easy to. It dyes much more easily, and you can do a much broader range of colors. Whereas the duck and canvas pretty much were always earth tones, one earth tone or another. So everybody wore kind of the same looking pants until New York University shows up wearing purple, pants. So, I mean, you think about it, that was a big deal. All of a sudden, somebody, hey, they're wearing purple pants.
Right. But, yeah, I was just trying to go when you were saying, that from the $15 helmet down to the $2.35 helmet. I'm picturing, hey, varsity players, you get the $15 helmet with the leather lined, and freshmen, you're going to get the burlap lined helmets, or something uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm sure that was the case. Or obviously the freshmen who were wearing the stuff that was the latest and greatest 10 years ago.
Right.
So, yeah. And the other thing on some of that is I was looking at. So I'm writing one of these, and there's kind of like a flap in the back between kind of the ear hole area and the back, and it's got some kind of flexible extension, some kind of elastic band there. And so that's part of the sizing. If you look at the catalog, sometimes not a lot said about the sizing of helmets. And so, I always had a big old water bucket head, so I needed a big helmet. I've got a younger brother who's, got a pinhead. And, so, but presumably we, would have been issued the same helmet. So.
Oh, geez.
I'm sure they had some kind of size variations, but they don't talk about it much in the catalog.
Size variations, you had to stuff some straw or a rag in the back or something to make it stay on your head. Well, Tim, that's fascinating stuff, and you've got a lot of these Goldsmiths that you've been coming out. Like you said, you have an 8-part series on it. But you have a lot of other interesting stuff coming out. 7 days a week. And maybe you could share with folks how they could get in touch with you to learn about your tidbits and read them each and every day.
Yeah, so so my preferring would be that you just visit the site and you subscribe, and then that way, basically, if you're subscribed, you'll get the tidbit by email every night, because I issue them at 7:00 Eastern. If you're a Substack reader, you can also just get it and follow me on Substack, and then you'll be able to get them every night. Some people don't want the email, but they like getting it on Substack. I also, at least for now, I'm still tweeting it every night, and then I also post it on the application Threads. So, on one of those, it's always Football Archaeology. If you enter that, you'll find me, and then it's kind of like happy reading.
All right. Well, Timothy Brown, thank you once again. FootballArchaeology.com is the place to go, and we appreciate you, sir. And we will talk to you again next Tuesday.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Derek.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.